The sky above the Holy Land burned with heat, and the wind carried dust instead of rain. It was July 1187, and the ground itself seemed thirsty, cracked, dry, and broken. But the land was not the only thing under pressure. Its great powers were about to clash. One marched under the sign of the cross, the other under the shining crescent. On one side stood the Kingdom of Jerusalem, ruled by King Guy of Lusignan. His army was strong and proud. Over 20,000 men followed him, knights, soldiers, and religious orders like the Templars and Hospitallers. Their goal? Defend the holy city of Jerusalem from Muslim control. It held it for nearly 100 years, since the First Crusade. But now, danger had returned. And this time, it came not from the shadows, but from a man with a vision. Sultan Salah ad-Din, known in the West as Saladin. Saladin had done the impossible. He united Muslims under one banner, Egyptians, Syrians, Kurds, and Arabs brought together not by gold or fear, but by faith. His goal was simple, but powerful: liberate Jerusalem from foreign hands and return it to the people of Islam. But Saladin was not just a warlord. He was patient, smart, and deadly when the time was right. The story began when a Crusader lord named Ranald de Chatillon attacked a Muslim caravan, spite a peace treaty. Women and children were killed. Saladin was furious. He sent a message to the Christian king: "You will answer for this." The war drums started to beat. Crusader scouts reported that Saladin was gathering a massive army in the east. But instead of waiting for the enemy to come, King Guy decided to march out and face him. His advisors warned him it was the hottest time of the year, and water was scarce. But pride and pressure made him blind, so the Crusader army began to move. Leaving the cool springs of Sepphoris and heading into open land, Saladin had already predicted their route. He sent his riders ahead to burn the grass, block the wells, and poison the paths. The Christians didn't notice at first. By the second day, the soldiers were tired. The sun beat down harder. The dust filled their mouths, and worst of all, no water. Not a drop. Their horses began to stumble. Men fainted in the heat. The mood turned dark. Templars argued with Hospitallers. Some shouted that King Guy had made a mistake. Meanwhile, distant ridge. Saladin watched everything. He didn't attack. Not yet. He waited for thirst to do what swords could not. At night, the Crusader camp was restless. Fires from Saladin's forces circled the hills. Drums pounded through the dark. No one could sleep. The enemy wasn't attacking, but they weren't letting them rest either. A strange fear began to rise. The strongest army in the Holy Land now felt small, lost, and alone. Their own land had become a stranger to them. No water, no wind, just smoke, heat, and drums. By morning, the army reached the Horns of Hattin, two hills shaped like twin peaks. There was still no water. But King Guy was told there might be a spring nearby. Desperate, he ordered his men to camp and prepare to fight. But the trap had already closed. Saladin had chosen this place on purpose. His archers and cavalry surrounded the hills. The Crusaders had nowhere to run. And every moment that passed, their bodies grew weaker. Their armor felt heavier. Their hope thinner. Saladin whispered to his commanders, "Now, we begin." The sun rose like fire above the Horns of Hattin. Its rays stabbed through the dry morning air. The Crusaders had barely slept. Some lay slumped under their shields, coughing dust. Others sat beside dying horses, licking their lips too dry too. The heat was not just painful, it was deadly, and Saladin knew it. From the edge of a nearby ridge, the Sultan watched with calm eyes. His men were fresh, fed, watered, ready. His plan wasn't just to win a battle, it was to break an army. Saladin's commanders whispered among themselves. Should they attack now? He shook his head. "Let them suffer more," he said quietly. "Thirst is my best general." Down below, King Guy looked over the battlefield. What he saw chilled him, though the air was burning hot. Every direction they turned, Muslim banners flew. The hills were full of archers. Horsemen in light armor rode in circles, watching them like wolves. But worst of all, The Lake Tiberias was just a few miles away, shining blue. So close, they could see the water reflect the sky, but they couldn't reach it. That lake was guarded. Saladin's forces had sealed every path. Some of Guy's knights begged, "Him, let us charge for the water. Let us die trying if we must." But others warned, "It's suicide. We will lose everything if we break formation." Tension grew like fire in dry grass. At midday, the smoke began. Saladin's men lit the grass around the hill. The wind carried the smoke right into the Crusader camp. Thick, choking, hot. Stung their eyes, made them cough. Horses panicked. Men screamed. Some tried to flee the smoke, only to be shot down by arrows. It was no longer a battlefield. It was a slow-burning trap, and it was working. A knight named Balian of Ibelin stumbled toward the command tent. His voice was rough from thirst. "We can't wait here," he rasped. "Our men are collapsing. Even the war horses are dying." King Guy looked at his broken army. He could barely recognize it. This was supposed to be the strong, holy force of Christendom. And now they were weak, half-blind, and surrounded. He made a terrible decision. He ordered the Holy Cross, the sacred symbol. They carried into every major battle to be raised. And then he shouted, "Prepare to attack." The Crusader knights obeyed, tired, angry, but still proud. They lined up under the burning sky. Their feet dragged, armor stuck to their skin. Some had to be helped onto horses. But when the horns blew, they rode out one last time, straight at the enemy. Saladin didn't stop them. He waited. And when they came closer, he gave the order now. The Muslim cavalry moved like a wave. Arrows flew in every direction. Crusaders fell from their horses. Many never reached the enemy line. Some who did were swallowed by the sand and steel surrounded. Disarmed, dragged off alive, the Templars fought fiercely, refusing to retreat. They were pushed back up the hill. Their leader was bleeding from the mouth. The field was red, and the lake, that beautiful lake, was still just out of reach. By nightfall, the hilltop was covered in bodies. The Crusader army was no more, broken, scattered, dying. Many surrendered. A few tried to escape, but there was nowhere. Left to run, as the stars blinked awake in the sky, King Guy sat in silence. He was still alive, but not for long. As a king. On the ridge, Saladin removed his helmet. Sweat dripped from his beard. He looked down at the battlefield. His trap had worked. It's no water, no mercy, no escape. But he wasn't smiling. He turned to his men and said, "Send word. Jerusalem is next." Night had fallen, but there was no peace, no quiet, no sleep. From the top of the twin peaks, the Horns of Hattin, the Crusaders, watched helplessly as rings of fire circled their hill like a noose, slowly tightening. It was no longer a battle. It was a slow death. A hunt. Smoke filled the sky. Sparks danced in the dry wind. Below, Saladin's forces lit the grass and brush, building a wall of flames that pushed heat and fear uphill. The smoke choked the Crusaders, filling their lungs, burning their eyes. They couldn't breathe. They couldn't rest. Couldn't even think. Even the strongest knights began to cough like sick old men. But Saladin, he watched from a distance, calm, silent, unshaken. The fire wasn't just a weapon. It was a message. You are surrounded, and you will fall. In the Crusader camp, chaos ruled. Soldiers fought over a few drops of water. Some cried for their mothers. Others whispered prayers with cracked lips. Horses screamed in panic as fire drew near. King Guy clutched the sacred true cross, his fingers trembling. "It's the fire of hell," one soldier gasped. "No," whispered a Templar beside him. "This is the fire of our pride." A brave commander, Raymond of Tripoli, tried to organize a breakout before sunrise. He gathered a few mounted knights, ready to charge and cut through the enemy lines, maybe find water, maybe find freedom. But just before they moved, a massive wave of Saracen archers appeared through the smoke, blocking the path. Raymond realized it was useless. The trap was perfect. They weren't just surrounded physically. They were crushed mentally, slowly, cruelly. When the sun rose again, it didn't bring hope. It brought heat. worse than the day before. Even the stones underfoot felt like they would melt. Then came the drums, thousands of them. Saladin's forces surrounded the hill on every side, beating heavy war drums that echoed across the battlefield like a heartbeat before death. Boom, boom, boom. The Crusaders, already dizzy from dehydration and smoke, couldn't block out the sound. Some screamed, some knelt and begged the sky for rain. Rain never came, only arrows. The attack began in full. Waves of archers launched volleys without pause. The Christians raised their shields but with weak arms. The few knights who still had horses tried to form a charge, but the horses were too exhausted. Some collapsed before taking 5 steps. Saladin gave the order, split them. Muslim cavalry rushed in from both sides, dividing the Crusaders on the hilltop into small, helpless groups, like lions picking off a broken herd. In one corner, Hospitallers made a desperate last stand, surrounded, bleeding, but unbroken. Their leader shouted, "We fight till the end." They did, but they all fell. At the center of the hill, King Guy's tent was struck by flaming arrows and collapsed. Panic spread through the ranks. Without a king, some thought the battle was over. Dozens dropped their weapons and surrendered on the spot. Others tried to run downhill but were met with sharp blades and flying arrows. The true cross, the most sacred relic of the Crusaders, was captured by Saladin's men. One of his soldiers raised it high, and the crowd of Muslim fighters roared with victory. It was more than a symbol. It was a shattering of morale by midday. The hilltop was silent. No drums, no charging knights, just bodies, just ash, just the cries of wounded men and dying horses. The great Crusader army, once proud, loud, and feared, was now just a memory. Saladin walked through the battlefield on foot. His men cleared a path. He looked not with cruelty, but with heavy thought. He saw suffering, pain, pride shattered by strategy. And then, he said softly, "Jerusalem will open her gates soon." The hilltop was quiet, too quiet. The fires had burned low. The smoke had cleared just enough to reveal the nightmare that remained. Burnt armor, fallen standards, ash-covered bodies. What was once a proud Crusader army now looked like ghosts under the desert sun. But one sound still echoed through the Horns of Hattin. Hope dying. King Guy sat on the ground. His sword lay next to him, untouched. His fingers trembled on the wooden cross he wore around his neck. His face, covered in sweat, dirt, and guilt, showed the truth. He had led them here, and now they would die here. But just then, a voice broke the silence. "We can still fight." It was Renaud Chatillon, the man whose raid had started all of this. His voice was hard, but his eyes wild. "The true cross may be gone," he said, "but God still sees us. We ride one last time, not for victory, but for honor." Some soldiers groaned. Others spat at the ground. But a few knights stood, wounded, bleeding, but standing. A final charge. Within minutes, the last of the mounted knights gathered Templars, Hospitallers, and nobles too proud to surrender. There were no war cries, no trumpets, just the heavy breathing of horses and the creaking of leather straps. The command was simple: ride downhill, break through Saladin's circle, reach the lake, or die trying. And then they charged. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't glorious. It was desperate. Hooves pounded the dry earth. The last Crusader screamed, not in fury but in defiance. Saladin's men watched from below. Many had seen Crusader charges before, waves of steel, crushing like thunder. But this was different. Broken armor, bloodied banners, final breath, still. Saladin gave the signal. Let them come, then closed the trap. The Muslim cavalry split like waves on a rock, letting the Crusaders rush through. Just far enough, then they turned and surrounded them. It was like watching sand bury a flame. Swords clashed, horses screamed. Men fell one after another. One knight, his helmet missing, face bloody, reached the edge of the battlefield. The lake was just there. He reached out. An arrow struck him through the neck. He never touched the water. Back on the hill. Saladin himself approached the captured leaders. King Guy had been found under a broken tent, too weak to run, too ashamed to speak. He was brought to Saladin, along with Renaud de Chatillon, who glared at the Sultan without fear. Saladin offered Guy a cup of water, sign of mercy. King Guy drank. His hands shook. Then Renaud reached for the same cup. Saladin pulled it away. "You started this," he said. "You murdered the innocent under my protection." Then Saladin drew his sword and executed Renaud himself. No anger, no joy. Justice. The rest of the prisoners watched in silence. That moment told them everything. Saladin was not a savage. He was not like them. It was something else. A man of power. Yes, but also of principle. By sunset, the battle was over. The hill was silent again. The Crusaders had charged, and the desert had swallowed them. The battle was over, but the real pain, the pain that lasted far longer than any sword wound, was just beginning for King Guy of Lusignan. He sat beneath a broken canopy, his armor removed, his royal robes torn. He no longer looked like a king. He looked like a man who had lost everything, and he had. Across the field, Saladin walked among the ashes. He said nothing, just looked. Tents were scattered. Swords lay buried in blood-soaked earth, the Holy Cross taken. Thousands of Crusaders dead. Captured or too weak to stand, the sun began to fall from the sky, casting long shadows over the Horns of Hattin. Then Saladin gave an order. "Bring me the king." King Guy was led through the field of his defeat. The Muslim soldiers did not mock him. They didn't need to. Every broken body, every sword buried in the sand, every drumbeat of silence said enough. When Guy was brought before Saladin, the Sultan didn't shout. He didn't gloat. He simply poured a cup of cool water, handed it to the king. A small act, but in this dry land, a powerful one. Guy drank like a dying man. But when Renaud de Chatillon, the man, would cause the war wretch to share the cup, Saladin pulled it away. "You do not deserve this mercy," Saladin said coldly. And before anyone could speak, he drew his sword and struck. Renaud's body dropped to the ground. His head rolled at King Guy's feet. Guy trembled. Saladin looked him in the eyes. That was justice, not rage. The next day the prisoners were divided. The nobles, men of power and gold, were spared, to be ransomed later. But the Templars and Hospitallers, fiercest warriors of the Crusades, were brought out in rows. Saladin had made a decision. They would not be allowed to fight again. One by one, they were executed calmly, quickly. It was not cruelty. It was strategy. Saladin could not risk letting them return to battle. King Guy watched from a distance, his hands bound. He was now a king without a kingdom, a man without command. The weight of his defeat hung around his neck heavier than any chain. And it wasn't just the battlefield he had lost. He had lost Jerusalem, not yet by sword, but by fear, as the Muslim army prepared to march toward the holy city. News of the defeat spread like wildfire. Church bells rang across Europe in horror. The Holy Cross lost. The Crusader army wiped out, and the road to Jerusalem wide open. That night, in Saladin's tent, a strange silence filled the air. The Sultan sat in thought, his commanders waiting. He looked over the map, his finger sliding from Hattin to the coast. Then to the holy city he whispered, "God has given us the day. Now let us take back the city." Meanwhile, in his dark corner of the camp, King Guy looked up at the stars. No crown, no sword, only shame. His last prayer was not for victory, but for forgiveness. The fires of Hattin had barely cooled, but Saladin was already looking toward Jerusalem. He stood on a high ridge, the sun rising behind him. His army gathered below, tens of thousands strong, banners waving like flames in the desert wind. Drums beat slowly. Horses pawed the ground. The air was thick with something far more powerful than rage purpose. The road ahead was not just stone and dust, but it was sacred. Every step they took brought them closer to the city where prophets had walked, where blood had spilled, and where Three religions held their breath, and Saladin's breath was steady. "Now," he said, "we march." Word spread fast. Jerusalem's defenders, still shocked by the news from Hattin, scrambled in panic. Their great army was gone, their king a prisoner, a holy cross lost. Panic gripped the holy city like a sickness. Women wept in the streets. Priests rang bells day and night. Some began to dig trenches. Others packed their belongings, ready to flee. But few believed salvation would come, because the one man approaching their gates had done the unthinkable. He broken the Crusader war machine in one blow. Saladin's army moved swiftly, like a sandstorm. Cities along the Waker, Nablus, Jaffa saw the black and green banners coming from afar, but most didn't fight. They surrendered peacefully, offering keys and treaties instead of swords. They had heard what happened at Hattin. They knew resistance would be useless. Saladin accepted each surrender with grace. No looting, no killing, just terms, signatures, and mercy. He was not only taking land, he was taking loyalty. But one city stood in the way before Jerusalem, Saladin. Crusaders who survived Hattin had taken shelter there. Others had fled there from surrounding towns. They hoped to regroup, to hold the port, to stop Saladin's advance. But when Saladin's army surrounded Ascalon, something unexpected happened. The city's defenders turned on each other. Fear and distrust spread like poison inside the walls. Soldiers argued about surrender. The noblemen fought over gold. Some blamed King Guy. Others blamed the Templars. By dawn, Ascalon's gates opened. No sword was lifted. Saladin entered peacefully in Jerusalem. The last true defender was Balian of Ibelin. He had escaped Hattin barely. Alive and now stood as the only noble with the courage to face what was coming. But the city was in chaos. The people looked to him for answers. Yet he had no army, no allies, no reinforcements from Europe. Nothing but broken walls and frightened eyes. Still, he made a choice. He would defend Jerusalem to the last breath. As Saladin approached the city, scouts brought reports. The walls are manned. The gates are locked. The people prepare for a siege. Saladin didn't flinch. "Then we wait," he said. "We will offer peace, but if they deny it, we take the city by storm." From the Mount of Olives, Saladin saw Jerusalem for the first time since his childhood. He removed his helmet. He stared at the golden dome, the ancient stones, the towers reaching toward heaven. He whispered, "This is not revenge. This is return." The city prepared for war. Children carried stones. Priests gave last blessings. Mothers clutched babies and stared at the horizon, where dust clouds marked the coming of a new fate. But Saladin did not attack right away. He sent a message, a letter, a promise. "Lay down your arms," it read, "and no blood will touch these streets. But if you fatai, we'll take what is mine." Jerusalem's defenders were silent until Balian replied, "If we surrender, what happens to the people?" Saladin's answer came quickly. "They live, they leave, they stay in peace." Balian paused. He knew he could fight, but at what cost? The sun had just begun to rise over the city of Jerusalem, casting golden light on its ancient walls. The streets were quiet to quiet. No bells, no chants, only the soft footsteps of frightened citizens watching from behind shutters and temple doors. On the eastern hills, beneath the olive trees, stood a man who had changed the fate of the Holy Land. Saladin. He did not draw his sword. He did not shout commands. Instead, he waited, calm, steady, unshaken. Behind him, the full weight of his army stood ready. Archers, cavalry, warriors of every tribe and tongue. But none moved forward, because the city would not be taken by fire, unless it had to be. Inside the city walls, Balian of Ibelin stood, tall, though his armor was dented and his hands were calloused from digging trenches. His voice echoed across the courtyard as he addressed the citizens. "If we fight, we may buy time, but we will lose, and if we lose, they may show no mercy." Silence followed, and someone whispered, "What will Saladin do to us?" That was the question no one could answer. Until that afternoon, Saladin sent his second message, "Surrender the city, And I give my word, no slaughter, no burning, no forced conversions. Only peace, or pay in blood. It was not a bluff. Everyone knew what had happened when Crusaders took Jerusalem. In 1099, tens of thousands had been butchered in the streets. The city remembered that blood. But would Saladin be different? Balian rode out to meet him. The two men stood face to face, one the last defender of the Crusader Kingdom, the other the most powerful Muslim leader in the world. And yet, they spoke like men, not monsters. "I will not surrender," Balian said, "unless you promise the safety of every man, woman, and child." Saladin did not hesitate. "I give you my word." And in that moment, a deal was made that would change history. The gates of Jerusalem opened, not to fire, not to slaughter, but to order, honor, and mercy. Saladin entered the city not as a destroyer, but as a restorer. He did not ride on a golden duddios. He did not ride on a golden horse. He walked on foot, like a pilgrim. He went first to Al-Aqsa, desecrated during the Crusader rule. He wept at its steps, then prayed. Later, he visited the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. He ordered it protected. He let Christians stay if they wished. He let Jews return. After they had been banned for nearly 90 years, no fires were lit, no books burned, no temples destroyed. The people who had feared him now watched him in awe. Even enemies began to whisper, "This man is no barbarian. He is something greater." Across Europe, kings trembled. The Holy Land, once thought safe, had fallen. The Third Crusade would soon rise in fury. But Saladin didn't fear war. He feared losing justice. He told his men, "If you take anything by force, return it. If you harm the weak, you insult me." Years later, even his enemies, Richard the Lionheart included, would call him the noblest enemy ever faced. Saladin died not long after. When they searched his tent, they found no gold, no castles, no treasure, just his sword and a torn robe. He had lived and died for something bigger than conquest. His legacy was not carved in stone. It was written in mercy and remembered forever.